It's Top 5 Tuesday. Today, I'll give you my top 5 Mariners concerns heading into the offseason, and Colby will give you the top 5 pitches in baseball. Colby, hit it.
You are Locked On Mariners, your daily Seattle Mariners podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Ahoy, sailors. It is Tuesday, November 5th, 2024. This is Tutting Gonzalez and Colby Patnode for the Locked On Mariners podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Top 5 Tuesday, and the wheel has spoken. Today, I will give you my top 5 Mariners concerns this offseason, and Colby will list the 5 best pitches in Major League Baseball. But before we get into all that, shout out to our title sponsor today, FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. And if you want to hear from me and Colby even more and help support the show, check out our Patreon. All you have to do is click the link in the description of this episode. So before we get into my top 5 lists, let's go over some quick news and notes for the Mariners. That's happened over the last 24-ish hours since we last talked to you guys. Mitch Haniger officially picked up his player option. It took a little while for it to get officially announced, but did pick up the option as expected. So he's on the roster, and the Mariners will either have to do something about it or maybe they won't. We'll see. They also added Blas Castano, right-handed pitcher, to the 40-man roster. And like we always say, folks, if the Mariners do something with a pitcher, particularly one that you haven't heard of, I want to still pay attention. You know, if they add them via waivers or add them to the 40-man roster, what have you. So we'll keep an eye on Blas Castano. Might just, want to log that in your memory banks for later. And then lastly, the most recent piece of Mariners news, Tommy Joseph, assistant hitting coach for the Mariners this year, has moved on to the Baltimore Orioles. So we finally have a piece of coaching news coming from the Mariners. So that's pretty interesting. So yeah, that's about it. Any thoughts on those moves, Colby?
I mean, no, nothing too unexpected. Obviously, the Blas Castano one is kind of out of left field. He wasn't particularly good in AAA this year, but the Mariners very clearly thought that he was going to either leave in minor league free agency or he was going to get picked in the Rule 5 draft, and they clearly liked something about him to add him to the 40-man and be worried enough about him leaving that they didn't want to risk it. So, like you said, with the Mariners, whenever they target a pitcher, whenever they, add any kind of arm whatsoever, you really do have to stop and kind of give them the benefit of the doubt, even when it doesn't appear to make a lot of sense on the surface like this one does. But also worth noting that just because you're on the 40-man on, November 5th doesn't mean you're going to be on the 40-man on December 5th or November 8th. They could DFA him at any point if they need to make room, but they also have plenty of other levers they can pull. Like the Mariners do not have a 40-man crunch. So yeah, they want to use a 40-man spot on Castano and try and carry him all winter and give him a shot to, pitch out of the bullpen next year. Then maybe they're right, give them the benefit of the doubt on that. And if it doesn't work out, it really didn't cost them anything to try.
So let's get into my top 5 list. I did top 5 reasons to be optimistic about the Mariners a couple of weeks ago. Now I am listing my top 5 concerns about the Mariners. And like Colby usually does, I am setting my own parameters for this list. I am doing top 5 concerns regarding the offseason specifically. So number 5, the Mariners' positional needs and headaches are not just exclusive to them. For example, there's a reason there aren't many quality third basemen on the market this winter, because there aren't that many quality third basemen in Major League Baseball right now. And other teams are going to be swimming in the same water as the Mariners are. And while that isn't an excuse for not coming away with what they need this winter, it does make me a bit concerned that they might fall short in some areas and what their fallback plans might be. Basically, the Mariners have to be the aggressors this winter. They have to essentially set the tone, jump the market. And they've done that in the trade market a couple times over the last few acquisition periods. I think about the Randy trade, the Luis Castillo trade a couple of years ago. But it is imperative now more than ever that they do that again this winter and to an even more aggressive degree.
Yeah. I mean, you don't want to be back on your heels essentially and waiting for the market to dictate. That's the mistake they made not last winter, but the winter before, where they were sure that the market was going to come back to them and the market was going to crash back to them, and it didn't. And of course, we have the infamous, it was from Ryan Divish. I think it was said by, I can't remember who said it, but like they're going to come crawling back to us, asking,
It was Mather.
Yeah, of course it was.
Yeah, and it wasn't just from Ryan Divish. It was the Bellevue Rotary Club video. Yeah.
Specifically, it was about like Taiwan Walker.
Yeah.
But so like in the past, the Mariners have waited out the market, waited for prices to get to a point, and you should do that to some degree, but you also have to be aggressive, particularly on the trade market. Like you set the prices, and then if you happen to overpay by 10%, who cares? Like it really doesn't make that big of a difference. So you be the aggressor, you go out there, you set the market, you make the first or second big trade. Be one of the first teams to make the big trade this winter. And Jerry's done it in the past a couple times, and other times he's played back on his heels. And typically things work out a lot better for him when he's aggressive. So hopefully he is again this winter.
Number 4, the Mariners assume too much out of the bullpen arms they already have. We talked about this a little bit yesterday. The bullpen was a problem, particularly towards the end of the year. Injuries obviously derailed things, not just Santos and Brash, but also Jimmy Garcia. And while Santos should be ready for opening day and Brash should come back at some point, I don't think you can build your bullpen in a way that banks on getting anything out of either of those guys, especially Brash, in good faith. So I think they need to add another high leverage arm. Not just to take some of the workload off of Andres Munoz, but also to reset some of their mid-leverage guys back into strictly mid-leverage roles, right? Ideally, I'd like to very rarely see the Trent Thorntons and Edward Bizardos of the world throwing high-leverage innings, unless they've absolutely earned the right to do that. I'd also like to brace for a potential setback from Colin Snyder. So adding another legitimate dude in the bullpen does that. It accomplishes that.
Yeah, I mean, like we talked about this. I said I'm probably going to end up being a broken record on this topic, but the Mariners need bullpen help. It is a sneaky need that they absolutely need to put real effort into, like not just like, oh, well, we claimed 2 more Colin Snyder types. Hopefully one of them hits. Like, no, they need to go get better. They need to go find, another Gregory Santos, or maybe they need to actually invest like real, either prospect capital or money in finding, at least the backing guy. And it doesn't have to be the $15 million a year relievers. It can be the $7-8 million a year reliever types. Or you go trade for one who would be making $15 million if they were on the open market, but they're not. So you have to go good prospect capital to go get those guys. The bullpen is important, particularly if you're the Mariners and you're a run prevention team. You have to have a good bullpen. So they absolutely should be, again, you're going to get to a point, unfortunately, where you have to kind of prioritize. Do you need an everyday second baseman? Do you need a high leverage arm? Blah, blah, blah. And obviously you'd want the everyday second baseman, but they should be trying to do both of those things because they're absolutely both very important if this team wants to win the division and, make a deep playoff run next year. Absolutely.
So I'll be going over my top 3 concerns for the Mariners this offseason in just a moment. But first, you'll like this, Colby. This episode of the Locked On Mariners podcast is brought to you by Hims. All right, fellas, you ever feel like you need a little boost in the bedroom? Well, if you do, you know what I'm talking about here. It's time you stop worrying about your performance and get Hims so you can feel confident knowing you can get hard and stay hard whenever you're in the mood. Hims is changing men's healthcare by providing you with access to affordable sexual health treatments from the comfort of your couch. Hims provides access to a range of doctor-trusted ED treatments like chewable hard mints and Viagra and Cialis and their generics for up to 95% cheaper. Start your free online visit today at hims.com/lockedon. That's HIMS.com/LOCKEDON for your personalized ED treatment options. hims.com/lockedon. The products mentioned are chewable compounded products which are not approved by or verified for safety or effectiveness by the FDA. Prescriptions require an online consultation with a healthcare provider who will determine if appropriate. Restrictions apply. See website for details and important safety information. Subscription required. Price varies based on product and subscription. And you're listening to the Locked On Mariners podcast. It is Top 5 Tuesday. I'm giving you my top 5 concerns for the Mariners this offseason. Just went over numbers 5 and 4. Let's get into number 3. And that is, because of how limited the outside options at their biggest positions of need are, will the Mariners allow defense to fall by the wayside in pursuit of offense? And this works both ways, by the way. Mm-hmm. Like, will they also not get the offensive upgrades they need in order to stay competent defensively? So I'm really curious to see if they can find some sort of happy medium, right? And it's possible the way they do that is by getting a guy who's, I don't know, for example, a better hitter and a slightly worse glove than Josh Rojas, but still doesn't have an ideal hitting profile for third base, but they're able to make up for some of that, like the power deficiencies at, say, second base. Right. Mm-hmm. Obviously, they tried to do that last year with Polanco and Rojas. It didn't work, but that's probably the most sound approach for them again this winter. And we do have, spoiler alert, something revolving around that idea in our offseason plan. So you'll see how that could potentially work tomorrow.
Potentially tomorrow.
Potentially tomorrow. Yeah, we're still unsure when we're going to do it. That is still
pending.
It's happening this week, though.
Yes, either tomorrow or Thursday based on outside factors. So, yeah, I mean, like, basically it's like, hey, would you rather have Alex Bombs, a.k.a. Alec Baum, who is a worse defender but a better hitter but still doesn't have the, 25 home run pop you want at third base? Yep. Or would you rather have, like, pure glove with below average bat? And, like, I think what we would like is, like, something kind of in the middle here. Like, be at least an average glove and at least an average bat at third base, like, ideally. And maybe they can't accomplish that. And if they can't, how do they maneuver that? It'll be interesting to see if they place value on defense or offense, because yes, the offense needs to be better. But again, the Mariners, if they're going to make the playoffs, if they're going to make a deep playoff run, it's probably going to be because of run prevention, not because they have a juggernaut offense. So how they balance that is going to be a really interesting part of their offseason.
Number two, the Mariners have a great farm, but how much will they be able to trade from it, and for what? We talked about this as well the other day. On one hand, you've got teams right now who are hoarding prospects, and on the other, you've got teams who really aren't interested in prospects, particularly ones that are multiple years away, because they think they can immediately compete to at least some capacity. Now, some of the Mariners' top prospects are getting pretty close to the majors, but which teams and how many of them are going to be interested in pure prospect packages? I'm sure there are some, obviously, but my concern here is, can I count them on one hand? And do those teams actually have what the Mariners need? Because I can name two I feel pretty sure about, and that's the Rockies and White Sox. And we talked about both of them during our divisional trade preview series, and they don't have much. So
maybe one or two players between them.
Yeah.
Plus the Rockies are dumb, so they probably think they can still compete next year. I mean, obviously, at this last deadline, 0 top 100 prospects changed hands. And now, I mean, to be fair, Vlad Jr. didn't get moved, Brent Rooker didn't get moved, but Randy Arozarena did. Isaac Paredes did. Like, there were legitimate dudes that were moved at this deadline that in the past easily would have fetched you one top 100 prospect as kind of the headliner. And instead they were moved for, good quality bulk. And then kind of a major leaguer for major leaguer swap. And that's kind of what we're looking at. There's just a shift here in baseball where hoarding prospects is becoming more and more of the game plan, more or less. And the Mariners have at times been pretty hesitant to move some of their top prospects. But I think, again, that usually where you find value in player acquisition, right, is you kind of zig when everybody zags. So hopefully they're willing to talk to some of those top prospects. I mean, depending on the publication, they have between 5 to 8 top 100-ish prospects. And so hopefully they're willing to move a couple of those guys, because I do think that is their best opportunity to add an impact bat. But, if they can add another Randy Arozarena type without giving up one of their top 5 or 6 prospects like they did in the summer, that is also totally fine.
Yeah, because we know the Mariners are going to hit the trade market hard, and we know they're going to have to trade away some major league talent, because that's just the name of the game nowadays. But can they get what they need without having to subtract too much from their major league roster? Can they use that great strength of theirs, that farm, to make their roster definitively better? No ifs or buts. That's kind of my concern right now. So number one, Do I even need to say it? John Stanton, Chris Larson, and the rest of that ownership group are still calling the shots. That seems pretty concerning to me. And look, I'm not saying that if Jerry Dipoto had no financial restrictions, he'd just start throwing a bunch of money out there. I'm not saying that. But the unwillingness to spend big dollars by ownership does close you off from a major portion of the market. And that ultimately narrows your paths to improving your roster. And while, yes, there is a lot of risk in handing out significant contracts to players either in their 30s or heading into their 30s, there are also exceptions to that. And it would be nice if the Mariners at least allowed themselves every now and then to realistically explore which of those free agents are the exceptions and take a real shot on someone. I'm not talking about 2 years, $24 million for Mitch Garver. I'm talking about like a real shot that is, multiple years, big time dollars, right? But they won't. But make no mistake, it's also on them to maneuver that because they know what they signed up for and they know what's being asked of them by this ownership group. So if they fail this winter, it's obviously not just on ownership, but it starts with ownership because they put the organization at a disadvantage right from the jump.
Yeah, I'm getting real tired of this conversation, but the Mariners just keep on forcing it to be a part of the conversation. Like legitimately, if the Mariners had like $185 million payroll, we wouldn't talk about ownership nearly as much. And 185, by the way, in case you're curious, is like the 13th highest payroll in baseball this year. We're not even asking them to be top 10, even though they absolutely should be. There's no reason for them not to be. Like we're literally asking them to spend a little bit more than the Angels.
Right.
And
honestly, I'm not even asking them to get to a specific number. I'm just asking them to not close themselves off from a market, from a major portion of the market. That's it.
Right. I mean, we talk about this all the time. Like at the end of the day, you don't really care what the number is as long as it doesn't prevent you from building the best team you can.
Yeah. Just build a good baseball team. Right.
Like I said, if the Mariners win the World Series and their payroll is 165 million instead of 185, most of us will not care. However, when you consistently come up short of your goals and you're not spending as much money as you can and should to kind of burst through that ceiling that you put on yourself, it's absolutely justified to be angry, to point at you and say, like, that's the problem. You're the problem. So, the only thing ownership ever has to do is not stand in the way. And again, I'm not saying that they should absolutely greenlight every single idea that Jerry has. I'm not even like they should spend $300 million like the Mets. And like, could they? Yeah, absolutely. They could. Will they? No. And I'm not asking them to. What I'm asking you is when Justin Hollander comes to you and says, hey, I think if we sign Christian Walker to this 3-year, $62 million deal, I think we can win the American League West. And I think we're a 95 to 100 win team. You don't say like, yeah, but can't we win 89 games if you go sign Carlos Santana and save $50 million? And that's kind of what's happening, more or less. I mean, they won't come out and say that's exactly what's happening. That's essentially what Jerry and Justin have had to deal with for the last 3 off seasons. Like, hey, give us this and we can build you a World Series team. And they go like, yeah, but the World Series is not really the goal per se. So like,
just don't close yourself off from like the Anthony Santanders of the world.
Yep.
That's all I'm asking. All right.
If you don't want to spend I mean, it's dumb, but whatever. Okay.
Yeah. You don't want to give 7 years and almost $200 million to Alex Bregman. Fine. Whatever. Right. Yeah. But 4 years, 100 mil to Anthony Santander.
Yeah.
You should be willing to do that. Yeah. Absolutely.
And you should be willing to do that without being like, okay, now go save me money somewhere else. Like, no, it should not be the baseball people's job to save you money. That's not their job. Their job is to build the best baseball team they possibly can. And your job is to support them in any feasible way. And it's absolutely feasible to expect the Seattle Mariners to put real financial resources into rounding out this already pretty good roster with pretty good players on it. That's absolutely a reasonable ask, and ownership will continue to stand in the way of that. We'll see. They only have to do it once, right? Like if they go sign Christian Walker this winter or whatever, some of that goes away for at least a moment. Like you buy some time. But when it's, hey, we go trade for this league minimum guy, and we have to give up Cole Young to get a worse first baseman because you won't let us just spend money to go get that, has long-term impact on the baseball team and the baseball side of things. And keep in mind, baseball is the business. That is where you make your money, is from the baseball. It is not about hat sales and merch sales. It is about the baseball team. The baseball team has to be, relatively competitive for you to turn a profit every single year. Unfortunately, that's all ownership cares about. Just be competitive so we can turn our profit, and then we can sell the team in 10 years and make, $2 billion on our investment. So yeah, ownership, of course, it's the biggest question mark. It's again, if the Mariners had the San Diego Padres ownership, they would have been in the playoffs probably 3, 4, or 5 times by now in the Jerry Dipoto era.
So there you go. Top 5 concerns for the offseason for the Mariners. Now it's time for Colby to give you his top 5 pitches in Major League Baseball. Just a moment. But first, a reminder, this episode of the Locked On Mariners podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 back in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. And you're listening to the Locked On Mariners podcast. It is Top 5 Tuesday. I just gave you my top 5 concerns for the Mariners this offseason. Now it's time to switch things up. Give the floor to Colby for his top 5 pitches in Major League Baseball right this second. So, Colby.
Yeah, a couple honorable mentions. Bryce Miller's splitter, believe it or not, the highest run value in all of baseball in that pitch, on all splitters, I should say. Plus 10 run value, and this is the first year he's thrown it. So, it might get even better. So Bryce Miller's splitter, honorable mention. I did want to throw Luis Castillo's four-seamer out there. I know that a lot of people think Castillo sucks. But this year, even with all of his struggles, opponents still hit just 203 against that pitch with a 365 slug and a 27.3% whiff rate. Those are all fantastic for a four-seam fastball. But that's actually kind of an outlier because even last year, opponents hit 165 off of the four-seamer and he had a 33% whiff rate on it. So Luis Castillo's fastball is still an elite four-seam fastball. Just want to throw those couple of Mariners out there. I think Brian Woo's fastball is close to being there. It is that dominant. Yeah, I mean probably the four-seamer more than the two-seamer. But again, you gotta be consistent. You got to go out there and you got to pitch like every 5 days, and it's got to be something you can kind of count on. So yeah, I mean like. You kind of look at these pitches. There are a lot of great pitches in baseball. I know I'm missing people off this list, and somebody would say, like, where's Garrett Cole's fastball? Yep, Garrett Cole's fastball is great. Spencer Strider's slider is great. Like, there are a ton of great pitches out there. Had to pick 5. But yeah, so we'll just dive in here. Couple iconic pitches on this list, and then a couple, maybe you didn't think about. How about Tariq Skubal's fastball coming in at number 5? Sits anywhere 93 to 96, but when he wants, seemingly at will, he could throw 100, and it's a left-handed fastball coming in at 100 miles an hour. It's insane how good that pitch is. Opponents hit 203 off of that pitch, same as Luis Castillo's. The difference is that the slugging percentage on it was 80 points lower than Castillo's. 286 was the slug on Skubal's fastball. Whiff rate basically the same. So Castillo and Skubal, their fastball, very similar, except Skubal had a little bit better command, was able to keep it out of the middle of the zone, give up a few less extra base hits on it. So that's the difference, and that's why Skubal gets the number 5 spot instead of Castillo. But Castillo's fastball, four-seamer, is legitimately one of the top, 20-ish pitches in baseball. He still has it, but it did decline this year. But Skubal's fastball, Really good last year, fantastic this year. It sets up everything else. And again, 100 miles an hour from the left side, you don't see that very often. Even today, when everybody's throwing 100, still not a lot of lefties throwing 100. And again, you have a sub 3 slug and a 27.7% whiff on that pitch. 30 is like elite for a four-seam fastball. So Skubal almost elite with no power, no hits given up on that pitch. It's a great pitch in Major League Baseball. Coming up at number 4, we have kind of a iconic pitch, kind of, so to speak, or at least it's getting that way. Emmanuel Clase's cutter that he throws at 100 miles an hour, a cutter at 100 miles an hour. Not a huge whiff pitch. Clase doesn't strike out a ton of dudes, so it's a little bit different than other pitches on this list. But opponents hit 150 against that pitch this year. They slugged 209. Clase had one of the best regular seasons in baseball history for a reliever, and it's because of that cutter. By the way, Clase's slider also could have made this list. It was really good this year as well, but it's 100-mile-an-hour cut. It's Mariano Rivera throwing 100 miles an hour. Like, I mean, come on. Like, what do you do with that pitch? Like, it's very difficult to square up. Even in the postseason when he struggled, or at least in some of his outings where he struggled, it was the CNI single, it was the broken bat blooper that really did him in. And he typically has very good command of that cutter. So Emmanuel Clase's cutter has to be somewhere in the top 10. I have it number 4. Again, the difference between number 1 and like number 15 is probably negligible. You can make a case for 30 different pitchers having the best pitch in baseball. But anyways, coming in at number 3, I'm going to go with Matt Brash's slider. It is.
He did it. Yes, 3. He did it.
Big caveat here. He did not throw that pitch in 2024 because he didn't throw any pitches in 2024.
He's still an active major leaguer though.
Yes, but we still have to, like, will he have the same bite? Will it have the same bite as it did coming off of the Tommy John surgery? That's a big question, you know?
Sure.
But based on the information we have right now, Matt Brash's slider is one of the elite pitches in baseball. And honestly, his sweeper or his slurve or his curve, whatever the other breaking ball is, pretty darn good too. Matt Brash, again, just in terms of raw stuff, might be the best guy in baseball. Just raw stuff. Command control, actual like pitchability, like maybe he never gets there, but raw stuff wise, Brash is definitely up there. These are 2023 numbers for obvious reasons, but against that slider, opponents hit 162 with a 216 slug, and get this, a 48.5% whiff rate. Half of the sliders Matt Brash threw towards home plate got swung at and missed.
Yep.
I'm sorry, what?
Yeah.
Ask Jose Ramirez how he feels about Matt Brash's slider. It's got to be up there. All right, coming in at number 2. I might be a little bit biased here, but I am a sucker for the left-handed curveball. So coming in at number 2 on the list for me, Blake Snell's curveball. It is a thing of beauty.
You love Barry Zito.
Barry Zito is one of my favorites. Like, I'm a sucker for the big left-handed curveball. But Blake Snell's curveball is legitimately great. It is better, statistically speaking, than Matt Brash's slider even. Opponents this year hit 111 off of the curveball with a 183 slugging percentage and a 49.3% whiff rate on that pitch. Blake Snell's curveball it's a joke. Like, it is, it is just a thing of pure beauty. And again, I like the tall, lanky left-hander with the big bender. One of my favorite profiles. That's why I love Barry Zito so much.
Yep.
But coming in at number 1, probably the most iconic pitch in baseball, at least right now. It's Devin Williams' changeup, screwball, whatever we want to call it. It has its own nickname, like a really good one too.
The Airbender.
I mean, like, that's a great nickname. And this year it was actually a little more hittable than it was the year before. This year, opponents hit 162 and 216, and that was up from what it was in 2023. Now, he also got more whiffs with it. This year, that pitch had a 48% whiff rate. In 2023, it only had a 42% whiff rate.
Wow.
But opponents,
what a scrub pitch.
I know. Opponents hit 097 with a 187 slug in 2023. Like the airbender changeup is still the best pitch in baseball. At the very least, like I don't think you can do it. It's definitely in the top. I feel like most strongly that like Devin Williams changeup is like the undisputed top 5. Everything else in here, if you want to nitpick, you want to say, oh, Garrett Cole had a better fastball than Tariq Skubal, blah, 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 whatever. Fine. But I'm thinking of pitches that like immediately came to mind. Like this is one of those things where you have to look at it and you kind of have to go like, yeah, I could look at the numbers. I could look at the data and all that. And I could probably get like I think Cade Smith had like the best fastball by run value in all of baseball this year. Nobody talks about Cade Smith's fastball outside of Cleveland, right? Like you kind of have to have like this big national like appeal. Like it has to be like something that is so obvious. When I say nasty, it pops in your head, right? Like, oh, nasty, like a Matt Brash slider, right? Like
one that popped in my head immediately that you didn't mention was Johan Duran's Splinker.
Yes.
Which you can throw for like
Paul
101.
Skeens.
Right.
Yeah, also
Paul
yep.
Yeah.
They were definitely on the list. I thought about both of those over Skubal's fastball. But Skeens, I was like, let's see if he can do it again next year. And Duran he's such a freak, dude. He's such a freak.
Yeah.
But I it's just tough because also when you go look at statistics for pitchers, typically a lot of statistics are cumulative, right? They're like run value is kind of cumulative. So relievers kind of get knocked down unnecessarily unless they have just like an insane pitch. But also if you throw fewer pitches, typically, and you would think in theory, there would be less opportunity for that pitch to get hit. Right. So we almost should do like top 5 relief pitcher pitches and top 5 starting pitcher pitches because they're different skill sets. But yeah, like I said, I feel really good about this list. Paul Skeens definitely could be on it next year. Probably will be, honestly. Like he's that good. There is it's the guy from the Dodgers that we've talked about a little bit. He has like an elite changeup, but he just hasn't done it. He was really good in 2023, but terrible this year, righty.
Bobby Miller.
Yes, like Bobby Miller's changeup could be on this list next year. That is a filthy pitch. But yeah, like I feel like Devin Williams and Emmanuel Clase, those are just iconic pitches of the era. Like you think cutter, you think of Clase. You think changeup, you think of Devin Williams. To me, when I think slider, I think of Matt Brash. When I think fastball, I think of Tariq Skubal. When I think curveball, I think of Blake Snell. Like I think if you put these 5 pitches on one pitcher, they would win the Cy Young every single year. So yeah, these guys, these are the elites of the elites. And there's, like I said, there's a lot of guys. Like, me, I love a good fastball. I have a very particular name for a good fastball. That also starts with 4 letters.
Heck you fastball.
Yes. It doesn't start with an H though. But yeah, like
it ends in a CK though.
It does. I love that pitch. And so I could have probably done top 5 fastballs and that'd been great. But like I said, you kind of have to pick and choose. And this is kind of a taste thing. Like if you really like the Splinker, then Duran and Skeens are probably going to be on this pitch. I'm more of a fastball, curveball, changeup type of guy. So that's why my list ended up like it was. But the cutter, I couldn't ignore the cutter of Clase. That thing, it's lethal. So yeah, I feel pretty good about my list, but I'm sure I missed like a lot. Like there's a lot of people who are screaming like, "Oh, well, you didn't even mention this pitch." It's like, well, mention it in the comments.
Senga's Ghost Fork and all
that. Yeah, that's a great pitch. Like, pitching has never been better than it is right now.
Oh, yeah.
So to whittle this down to 5 guys and 5 different pitches, impossible. But yeah, let us know. Like, what is your favorite pitch in all of baseball? Let us know. If you want to let us know, like, what your favorite pitch of all time is. Like, for me, like Randy Johnson's fastball is way up there. Love that pitch. Also the slider. I mean, Randy Johnson's awesome. So anything he threw was pretty awesome. Pedro Martinez changeup is way up on my list. That thing was Felix Hernandez's changeup. Like
I was just about to say, yeah.
I mean, there are so many great pitches in baseball, so many iconic pitches, and there's never been better stuff in the history of the game than there is right now, and that's not going away. Next year, we'll say the same thing. The stuff in 2025 is better than we've ever seen it before. You know what? We're going to say that in 2026 as well. Like that's the trend we're heading towards. it is freakish what these guys can do with the baseball.
That's going to do it for our show. But before we get out of here, a reminder that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. And now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Locked On Mariners podcast. For Colby Patnode, I'm Ty Gonzalez. Be sure to give us a follow on Twitter at LO_Mariners. You can follow me at Ty Gonzalez and Colby at CPAT11. That's CPAT11. You can also find all that stuff in the description of this episode. Have yourself a beautiful baseball day, and then we'll see you next time. Peace.